I understand, but you're walking here. You're carrying him. The takedown was available much earlier.
I couldn't take him down that early, but...
3 minutes, 16 seconds, round number one. We have your winner, Hamza Chimaev!
What if I told you that the man funding one of the UFC's most electrifying careers started out in a foreign country with literally nothing, not even a spoon to eat with? We talk a lot about fighters who come from nothing. We love those stories. Khabib climbing mountains in Dagestan, fighters scrapping in small gyms just to afford tape for their hands. That's the MMA narrative we've all bought into. But sometimes the most fascinating stories aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones hiding in plain sight. Because here's the thing, Arman Tsarukyan, one of the most dangerous lightweights on the planet right now, didn't come from the streets. He didn't fight because he was hungry. He fought because he chose to. And standing behind that choice is a man most of you have never heard of. A man who built a billion-dollar empire from absolutely nothing, who once moved his entire family across borders with no money and no plan, and turned sheer willpower into one of the most jaw-dropping rags-to-riches stories you'll ever come across. His name is Arman Tsarukyan. He is Arman's father. He is a construction mogul. And if you think you understand how rich this man is, trust me, you don't. We're talking private jets, helicopters for quick commutes, Rolls-Royce Phantoms, villas, a life so lavish that when UFC boss Dana White found out about it, his jaw hit the floor. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. It's not just about the money, it's about how Nairi got there. Because the road from "we didn't even have a spoon" to "my son pulls up to fight week in a $500,000 car" is one of the most compelling journeys I've ever researched. So buckle up, because by the end of this video, you are going to see Arman Tsarukyan and the man behind him in a completely different light. Let's get into it. This is Arman Tsarukyan, the billionaire construction mogul that the MMA world doesn't talk about nearly enough. To understand Nairi, you first have to understand where he came from. And that starts in a place called Akalkalaki, a small, quiet town in the country of Georgia, sitting right on the border with Armenia. Now, geographically, Akalkalaki belongs to Georgia, but culturally, it's almost entirely Armenian. The people there speak Armenian. They practice Armenian customs. They carry Armenian identity with pride. And that's exactly the world Arman Tsarukyan was born into. He was Armenian by blood, Georgian by address, and at some point in his life, he made a decision that would change everything. For him, for his wife Anaid Hakobian, and for the children they would raise together. Now, details about Nairi's early life are deliberately kept out of the spotlight. This is a man who values privacy above almost everything else. His business dealings, his personal history, his exact age, all of it is carefully guarded. What we do know, largely from what Arman has shared in interviews over the years, paints a picture of a man who was always driven, always working, always building, even when there was nothing to build with. Here's where things get really interesting. Before Nairi became the empire builder we know today, he was just a man with a family and a dream, trying to figure out how to give his kids a better life than the one he had. And like many immigrants who've come before him, he made the bold decision to uproot everything and move somewhere new. That destination was Russia. And that decision would prove to be the turning point that changed his family's fortune forever. In 1999, Arman Tsarukyan packed up his family, his wife Anaid, his oldest son Artur, and a 3-year-old boy named Arman, and moved to Russia. Let that sink in for a second. A man takes his family across borders into a country where he had no established connections, no guaranteed income, and no safety net. And according to Arman himself, they weren't just starting from scratch, they were starting from below scratch. Arman once said in an interview, "When my father moved to Russia, he started working in construction. He became successful from nothing. They didn't even have a spoon when they moved to Russia. A spoon. They couldn't afford a spoon." Now imagine being that man. You've uprooted your entire family. You're in a foreign city. You have 3 kids depending on you, and you have nothing in your hands except your will to work. That is where Arman Tsarukyan's story truly begins. He started at the bottom of the construction industry, doing the hard labor, learning the trade, grinding from the ground up. No shortcuts, no connections handed to him, no inheritance to fall back on. Just a man who woke up every single day and decided he was going to outwork everyone around him. And he did exactly that, day after day, year after year, from 6 in the morning until late at night. That was Nairi's schedule. Not just sometimes, not just when things were tough, every single day. Arman has spoken about this specifically, saying his father expected the same relentless standards from every single person who worked for him too. If you worked for Arman Tsarukyan, you worked hard, or you didn't work for him at all. But here's what separated Nairi from just being a hard worker. He wasn't just putting in hours. He was paying attention. He was studying the Russian real estate market. He was building relationships with the right people. He was identifying opportunities that others missed, and slowly, methodically, he began turning those opportunities into contracts, and those contracts into profit, and that profit into something much, much bigger. Speaking of building something bigger, this brings us to the part of the story where the real money starts flowing. By the time the 2000s were underway, Arman Tsarukyan had gone from a broke immigrant doing manual labor to a man with a foothold in one of Russia's most lucrative industries. Construction in Russia, especially real estate development, became his lane. And he didn't just operate in that lane, he dominated it. Russia's real estate market in the 2000s was booming. The country was developing rapidly. Infrastructure projects, residential builds, commercial developments. The demand was enormous. And Nairi had positioned himself perfectly to capitalize on every bit of it. His ability to read the market, build trust with business partners, and execute projects at a high level earned him a reputation. You don't become a mogul in Russia's construction sector by being average. You get there by being exceptional, by being reliable, and by understanding that in that world, your word and your work are everything. What's fascinating is how little we actually know about the specifics of Nairi's business operations, and that's entirely intentional. The Tsarukyan family keeps a very tight lid on the details of their empire. No public records, no interviews from Nairi himself, no social media presence. The man essentially doesn't exist publicly, and that's clearly by design. But the results of his work, those are impossible to hide, because by the time Arman Tsarukyan was becoming a known name in combat sports circles, the lifestyle his family was living made it very clear that Nairi's construction empire had reached an extraordinary level. You might think, construction business sounds modest, but we're not talking about a contractor with a few trucks. Reports from multiple outlets have placed the Tsarukyan family net worth in the range of $100 million, and some have speculated even higher. Now, Arman himself has pushed back on the idea that his father is worth $1 billion in the traditional sense, saying in an interview with Ariel Helwani that the family lives comfortably but he can't buy a private jet or a private yacht. But then again, this is the same guy who shows up to fight weak in a Rolls-Royce Phantom worth $500,000. The same guy who travels to fights on private jets. The same guy who stays in villas and uses helicopters for short commutes. So whether the number is 100 million or higher, what Nairi built is nothing short of extraordinary for a man who once couldn't afford basic kitchen utensils. Here's where things get really layered, because Nairi Tsarukyan isn't just a businessman. He's a father who raised 3 children, Artur, Arman, and Isabella, with a very specific philosophy about life. And that philosophy was simple. Nothing is given. Everything is earned. Even with all the wealth they were accumulating, Nairi refused to let his kids grow up soft. The moment Arman was old enough to be useful, Nairi put him to work. At just 11 years old, Arman was working in his father's construction business, earning 500 rubles per hour. This wasn't charity from a doting father. This was Nairi teaching his son the value of labor, the value of showing up, the value of earning something with your own 2 hands. Arman once revealed that at that age, he had his eye on a moped, not a gift, a goal. He was going to earn it himself, working for his dad's company. And that kind of mindset, setting a target and grinding toward it, is something you can see reflected in everything Arman does inside the cage today. Both Arman and his older brother Artur spent time working in the family business, and Nairi made sure they understood that the lifestyle they were living wasn't a birthright. It was the product of a man who sacrificed everything, who worked until his body was exhausted every single night, and who demanded that same standard from everyone around him, including his own sons. But the real test of Nairi's character as a father came when Arman walked up to him at 17 years old and told him he didn't want to work in construction. He wanted to be an MMA fighter. Now think about that from Nairi's perspective. You spent years building something from nothing. You want your sons to be part of that legacy. You've poured everything into your family's future. And your middle child, the one who's been working beside you since he was 11, looks you in the eye and says he wants to go get punched in the face for a living. What does Nairi do? He says yes. He doesn't fight it. He doesn't force Arman into the business. He sees his son's fire, he respects that drive because he recognizes it. It's the same drive that took him from nothing to everything. And so Nairi does what great fathers do. He steps back, he supports, and he lets his son chase greatness on his own terms. That decision would prove to be one of the most important moments in Arman Tsarukyan's entire life. Because unlike most fighters, Arman didn't have to take any fight just to pay the bills. He didn't have to rush his development. He didn't have to compromise his preparation because of financial pressure. His father's success had given him the one thing money truly can buy in combat sports: time. Time to grow. Time to train. Time to become the fighter he was always capable of being. As Arman once said himself, when you come from a rich family, you don't rush into fighting. You take your time. You do what you want and just focus on when it's your turn to fight. Let's talk about what this wealth actually looks like in practice, because the numbers are one thing. The lifestyle is something else entirely. Arman Tsarukyan has been nicknamed the Armenian Bruce Wayne by fans and media alike. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. After his stunning victory over Charles Oliveira at UFC 300, one of the most impressive performances of his career, Dana White was doing the rounds after the event when he spotted something that stopped him cold. Arman Tsarukyan, fresh off one of the biggest wins of his life, was sitting in a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car worth approximately $500,000. Dana White, a man who has seen everything in this business, reportedly walked up to Arman and said, "What are you doing here? Where'd you get a car like that?" Arman's response was essentially, "This is just how we do things," and it gets wilder from there. Arman and his team regularly travel to fights on private jets. They stay in private villas. They've used helicopters for short-distance travel. His social media has featured black caviar, luxury dining, and a level of opulence that most people only see in movies. When a viral video of him eating black caviar made the rounds and people started speculating about how expensive his lifestyle was, Arman actually tried to downplay it, saying the entire caviar spread for him and two friends cost around $250, which, if anything, just tells you that he's so used to living at that level that he genuinely didn't see what the fuss was about. His older brother Artur followed in their father's footsteps entrepreneurially, and Arman himself started his own business, a high-tech gaming lounge in Krasnodar, complete with top-tier computers and PlayStation setups. The renovation alone cost millions of rubles. Even when Arman branches out on his own, he does it at Nairi's level. Now, Paddy Pimblett has made comments about Arman being a rich boy who had everything handed to him. And look, it's not hard to understand why someone might see it that way from the outside. But that framing misses something crucial about the Tsarukyan story. Because what Arman inherited wasn't just money. He inherited a philosophy, a mindset forged by a man who built all of that from nothing. A man who worked 18-hour days so his children could have options, but who also made sure they understood that options aren't the same as entitlement. There's a big difference between a kid who gets handed everything and never earns anything, and a kid who grows up in wealth but is taught from the time he's 11 years old that you still have to work for what you want. Nairi understood that distinction, and he raised Arman with it. There's a moment that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between Nairi and Arman. In January 2018, before Arman was a UFC fighter, before the Rolls Royces and the private jets and the viral caviar videos, Arman posted a photo on Instagram. It was just him and his dad at a water park. Nothing glamorous, nothing extravagant, just a father and son goofing around on water slides. The caption Arman wrote said, We had a lot of fun. Dragged my dad to the water park. After the slide, he holds on to his heart. That one caption tells you so much. This big, serious, hard-working construction mogul, a man who wakes up at 6 a.m. and doesn't stop until late at night, getting dragged to a water park by his son, clinging to his chest, going down a slide, and his son posting it for the world to see, clearly absolutely delighted by it. That's the real Arman Tsarukyan, not just the businessman, not just the mogul, a father who shows up for his kids. And speaking of showing up, one of the most emotional storylines leading into Arman's fight at UFC Qatar was the fact that Nairi was going to be there in person. Because here's something most people don't know. The last time Nairi watched Arman fight live was back in 2019, Arman's very first UFC bout against Islam Makhachev. That was over 6 years ago. For 6 years, one of the most successful businessmen in Russia, a man who can charter private jets at will, hadn't been in the arena to watch his own son fight. Life gets complicated, business demands, family responsibilities. The world doesn't pause just because your kid is fighting in the UFC. But when the Qatar event came together, Nairi was going to make it. And for Arman, that clearly meant everything. The son who started working for his father at 11, the son who once had to tell that same father he wanted to leave the business and become a fighter, getting to perform in front of his dad again after 6 years. That's not just a fight, that's a moment. Let's zoom out for a second, because Arman Tsarukyan's story isn't just interesting because of the money. It's interesting because of what it represents. Here is a man who was born into modest circumstances in a small Armenian community in Georgia, who picked up his family and moved to Russia with literally nothing, who started at the very bottom of an industry, doing the hard, physical, unglamorous work, and through sheer force of will, intelligence, and relentless consistency, built something extraordinary. He didn't have a mentor pulling him up the ladder. He didn't have a family fortune to fall back on. He didn't have a network of powerful people opening doors for him. He had a work ethic that started at 6 a.m. and a vision that he refused to let go of, no matter how uncomfortable things got. And then, when he'd built all of that, when he could have sat back and let his kids coast on it, he instead chose to parent with intention. He put his sons to work. He made sure they understood the value of discipline. He let them have their dreams, but he made sure they knew how to chase those dreams the right way. You think about how much courage it took for Nairi to support Arman's MMA career. This wasn't a small thing. Arman wasn't going off to play football or run track. He was going into one of the most dangerous, most physically demanding sports in the world. And Nairi, a man who had spent decades building a future for his family, had to sit back and watch his son get in a cage and fight. He did it. Every time. Because that's what a real father does. Today, Arman Tsarukyan remains one of the most private, most fascinating figures on the periphery of the MMA world. His exact net worth, his specific business holdings, the full scope of his construction empire, all of it remains deliberately out of public view. And honestly, you've got to respect a man who has built what he's built and still chooses to stay in the shadows. The wealth speaks for itself. The son he raised speaks for itself. What this story shows us is something we don't talk about enough in sports. The people behind the athletes, the sacrifices made before the cameras ever turned on, the decisions made in foreign cities with no money and no plan. The midnight grind that most people never see and never get credit for. Arman Tsarukyan came from nothing. He built everything. He raised a champion, and he did it all without ever once standing in the spotlight to take a bow. So the next time you watch Arman Tsarukyan walk into the octagon, carrying the Armenian flag, moving with that unmistakable confidence, fighting with that relentless pressure that makes him so dangerous, remember what's behind all of that. A small town in Georgia. A man who couldn't afford a spoon. 6 a.m. mornings that never ended. And a father who looked his son in the eye and said, "Go chase it." That's the real story of the Tsarukyan family, and honestly, it's one of the best ones in the sport. What do you think? Does Arman's background as a rich kid make you respect his UFC career more or less? Let me know in the comments below. I genuinely want to know where you guys stand on this one. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content. And subscribe if you want more deep dives like this, because we've got a lot more coming. See you next time.